Mother Bear glanced at the vitals screen and growled. Soft agreement. What happened next was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The morning mist clung to the mountain slopes like a gray blanket when Dr. Kira Lawson first heard the helicopter approaching. She paused in her morning rounds at the Alpine Wildlife Medical Center, her coffee cup halfway to her lips as the rhythmic thrum of rotor blades grew louder. Emergency calls were rare at this elevation, tucked away in the remote wilderness of the Rocky Mountains. But when they came, they usually meant something serious. "Dr. Lawson, we have an incoming," shouted Marcus Webb, the center's field coordinator, as he burst through the clinic doors. His face was flushed from running, and his radio crackled with urgent voices. Fish and Wildlife found a bear cub caught in an illegal snare. The mother is still with it, and she's not letting anyone near. Kira set down her coffee and grabbed her emergency kit. After 15 years of treating wildlife, she'd seen every kind of injury imaginable. But bear cases always made her heart race. The protective instincts of a mother bear were legendary, and approaching an injured cub was like walking into a minefield. The helicopter touched down in the clearing behind the clinic, its downwash sending leaves and debris swirling through the air. The pilot, a weathered man named Dutch, killed the engine and jumped out, followed by 2 Fish and Wildlife officers who were carefully carrying a makeshift stretcher. "She's alive, but barely," called Officer Janet Cruz as they rushed toward the clinic. The snare was around her back leg for at least 2 days. We had to tranquilize her to get her free, but the mother bear never left her side. She's following our vehicle about 100 yards back. Kira's blood ran cold. A mother bear tracking them meant she would likely show up at the clinic within hours. The facility wasn't designed to handle adult bears, especially not protective mothers in distress. As they carried the unconscious cub into the medical bay, Kira got her first look at the patient. The young bear, probably 8 months old, was smaller than she expected, with dark brown fur matted with dirt and blood. The snare had cut deep into her left hind leg, and infection had already begun to set in. The cub's breathing was shallow and labored. "Get her on the table and hook up the monitors," Kira instructed her assistant doctor. Ryan Chase, a young veterinarian who had joined the team just 6 months ago. His hands shook slightly as he prepared the IV line, still getting used to the intensity of emergency wildlife medicine. The vitals monitor came to life with a series of beeps and flashing lights, displaying the cub's heart rate, blood pressure, and oxygen levels on a large screen mounted on the wall. The readings were concerning but not critical. The cub was fighting, which was a good sign. "Heart rate is elevated but steady at 140, Ryan reported, his voice gaining confidence as he focused on the familiar routine of medical procedures. "Blood pressure is low, probably from blood loss and dehydration." Kira nodded as she examined the wound more closely. The snare had done significant damage, cutting through muscle and possibly damaging the bone. They would need to operate quickly to save the leg, and there was still a risk that infection had spread too far. "Dr. Lawson," Marcus called from the observation window that looked out toward the forest. His voice had changed, becoming tight with concern. "We have company." Kira looked up from her patient to see what had captured Marcus's attention. Through the large glass windows that made up the front wall of the medical bay, she could see a massive brown shape moving between the trees. The mother bear had arrived. She was enormous, easily 400 pounds, with thick fur that caught the morning sunlight filtering through the canopy. But what struck Kira most was how the bear was moving. Instead of the aggressive, defensive posture she expected, the mother bear was walking slowly, deliberately, her head held high as she approached the clinic. "She's not acting aggressive," Kira observed, watching the bear's body language carefully. "Look at her ears. They're forward, not pinned back, and her head is up, not low and threatening." The mother bear stopped about 50 feet from the building and sat down, her massive frame settling onto the ground with surprising grace. She was facing the medical bay directly, as if she could see through the walls to where her cub lay on the treatment table. "I've never seen behavior like this," whispered Dr. Chase, moving to stand beside Kira at the window. "It's like she knows we're trying to help." The bear's dark eyes seemed to be fixed on something specific, and Kira followed her gaze. The mother bear was looking directly at the vitals monitor, its green glow clearly visible through the glass wall. The screen pulsed with the steady rhythm of the cub's heartbeat, a bright line dancing across the display. "That's impossible," Marcus said, shaking his head. "There's no way she understands what that monitor means." But as they watched, something extraordinary happened. The vitals monitor beeped as the cub's heart rate increased slightly, probably in response to the medication Kira had administered. At the exact moment the beep sounded, the mother bear's head tilted slightly, and she let out a low, rumbling growl. It wasn't a threatening sound. It was soft, almost musical, like the contented rumble a house cat makes when purring. The growl seemed to match the rhythm of the beeping monitor, as if the mother bear was responding to the sound of her cub's heartbeat. "Did you hear that?" Ryan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She's reacting to the monitor." Kira felt a chill run down her spine. In all her years of wildlife medicine, she had never seen anything like this. Animals were intelligent, more so than most people realized, but this level of apparent understanding was beyond anything in her experience. The mother bear's growl came again, longer this time, and definitely in rhythm with the monitor's beeping. Her massive head nodded slightly, as if she was agreeing with something, approving of what she heard. "I think she knows her cub is alive," Kira said slowly, trying to process what she was witnessing. "The monitor's telling her that her baby's heart is still beating, and she understands that." The idea seemed crazy, but the evidence was right in front of them. The mother bear continued to sit calmly, her attention focused entirely on the vitals screen, occasionally letting out those soft growls of what could only be described as agreement or approval. "We need to operate on this cub," Kira said, forcing herself to focus on the medical emergency, despite the unprecedented situation outside. "But we're going to have to do it with an audience." As if the mother bear had heard her words, she stood up and moved closer to the building, pressing her massive snout against the glass wall. Her breath fogged the window as she watched the medical team prepare for surgery, her dark eyes never leaving the vitals monitor that displayed her cub's life signs. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the medical bay as Dr. Kira Lawson prepared to perform surgery on a bear cub, while the most intelligent wild animal she had ever encountered watched every move through the glass, listening to the electronic heartbeat that connected her to her baby. Dr. Chase was preparing the surgical instruments when the first strange thing happened. As he laid out the scalpel on the sterile tray, the mother bear outside let out 3 distinct growls, each one different in pitch and tone. It was almost like she was trying to communicate something specific. "Did you count those growls?" Kira asked, not taking her eyes off the cub as she administered pre-surgical medication. 3 growls, 3 different tones. "I heard it too," Marcus said from his position by the window. "But that's not the weird part. Watch her eyes." They all turned to look at the mother bear, and what they saw made them freeze. The bear wasn't just looking at the vitals monitor anymore. Her gaze was moving systematically from one piece of equipment to another, as if she was cataloging everything in the room. Her eyes went from the heart monitor to the oxygen tank, then to the IV drip, and finally to the surgical lights hanging above the table. "She's studying our setup," Ryan whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. "Like she's trying to understand what each thing does." Kira had been a wildlife veterinarian long enough to trust her instincts, and every instinct she had was telling her that something extraordinary was happening. Bears were intelligent creatures, but this level of apparent comprehension was beyond anything documented in scientific literature. The cub stirred slightly on the table, letting out a weak whimper that was barely audible over the hum of the medical equipment. Immediately, the mother bear's head snapped toward the sound, and she pressed her entire body against the glass wall. The window flexed slightly under her weight, but the reinforced glass held. "Easy, Mama," Kira said softly, though she knew the bear couldn't hear her through the soundproof glass. "We're going to take good care of your baby." As if responding to her words, the mother bear's breathing became visible in the cool morning air, creating puffs of vapor against the glass. But there was something odd about the pattern of her breathing. It wasn't the rapid, stressed breathing Kira would expect from an anxious animal. Instead, it was slow and rhythmic, almost like a meditation pattern. "Dr. Lawson," Marcus called from the communications desk where he had been monitoring radio traffic. "We just got word from the ranger station. They found the poacher's camp about 2 miles from where the cub was trapped." Kira looked up from her preparations. "What did they find?" "That's the strange part," Marcus continued, his voice troubled. "The camp was destroyed. Not by weather or natural causes. Something big went through there and tore it apart. Food scattered everywhere, equipment smashed, but no sign of the poacher." "Could have been the mother bear," Ryan suggested, but Marcus shook his head. "The rangers don't think so. The destruction was too systematic, too thorough. Bears don't usually behave that way, even when protecting their young. They attack the immediate threat and move on. This looked like revenge." A chill ran down Kira's spine as she processed this information. She glanced back at the mother bear outside, who was still watching them with those incredibly intelligent dark eyes. Could this animal have deliberately hunted down the person who hurt her cub? The vitals monitor suddenly beeped more rapidly as the cub's heart rate spiked. Kira immediately checked the IV line and adjusted the medication dose, but before she could determine the cause of the change, something remarkable happened. The mother bear began to make a sound they had never heard before. It wasn't a growl or a roar. It was a low, melodic humming that seemed to vibrate through the glass and fill the medical bay with its resonance. The sound was hauntingly beautiful, like a lullaby sung in a language they couldn't understand. "She's singing," Ryan breathed, his eyes wide with amazement. "That bear is actually singing to her cub." As the humming continued, the cub's vital signs began to stabilize. The heart rate slowed to a more normal rhythm, and the breathing became deeper and more regular. It was as if the mother's voice was having a direct calming effect on her baby, even through the barrier of glass and unconsciousness. "I've never seen anything like this in 20 years of emergency medicine," Kira admitted, watching the monitors in fascination. "The cub is responding to her mother's voice even while under anesthesia." The humming continued for several minutes, creating an almost magical atmosphere in the medical bay. The harsh fluorescent lights seemed softer. The clinical beeping of the machines became part of a larger symphony, and everyone in the room felt the presence of something much larger than themselves. But then the humming stopped abruptly, and the mother bear's entire demeanor changed. Her head jerked toward the forest, her ears swiveled forward, and her body tensed into a defensive posture. A low, warning growl rumbled from her throat, completely different from the soft sounds she had been making moments before. "Something's coming," Marcus said, moving to the window that faced the forest access road. "I can hear an engine." Through the trees, they could see the flashing lights of an approaching vehicle. As it got closer, they could make out the markings of the State Wildlife Department. But this wasn't one of their usual rescue vehicles. This was a large truck equipped with heavy-duty tranquilizer equipment and animal control cages. "Who called in wildlife control?" Kira demanded, her voice sharp with concern. "Not us," Marcus replied, reaching for his radio. "And not the rangers who brought the cub in." The truck stopped in the clearing, and several officers got out, including one Kira recognized with growing dread. Director Coleman Walsh was known throughout the state wildlife system as a man who believed in aggressive management of problem animals. If he was here, it meant someone had classified the mother bear as a threat. "Dr. Lawson," Walsh's voice crackled over the radio. "We need you to move away from the windows and secure the medical bay. We're here to neutralize a dangerous animal that has been tracking injured wildlife to your facility." "Neutralize?" Kira grabbed the radio, her voice rising in anger. "This bear isn't dangerous. She's protecting her injured cub. She's shown no aggressive behavior toward us at all. Our reports indicate this animal destroyed a human camp and may have harmed a person," Walsh responded. "We have authorization to eliminate the threat." Outside, the mother bear had risen to her full height, easily 8 feet tall when standing upright. But she wasn't facing the medical bay anymore. She was turned toward the wildlife control truck, and the message in her posture was unmistakable. These newcomers were not welcome. "She knows," Ryan said quietly, watching the bear's body language. "She knows they're here to hurt her." The mother bear dropped back to all fours and moved with surprising speed to position herself directly between the medical bay and the approaching officers. Her message was clear. To get to her cub, they would have to go through her. "Dr. Lawson," Walsh's voice came over the radio again. "We're going to need you to evacuate the building through the rear exit. We'll handle the animal." "No," Kira said firmly into the radio. "I'm not leaving my patient, and I'm not letting you harm this bear. She's done nothing wrong." Through the window, she could see Walsh gesturing to his team, directing them to spread out around the building. They were carrying high-powered tranquilizer rifles, but Kira knew that the dose required to drop a 400-pound bear could easily be lethal if miscalculated. The mother bear seemed to sense the increasing danger. She looked back at the medical bay one more time, her eyes finding the vitals monitor that still displayed her cub's steady heartbeat. Then she did something that made everyone in the room gasp. She placed one massive paw against the glass window and gently tapped 3 times. The sound echoed through the medical bay like a drumbeat. Then she tapped 3 more times, in exactly the same rhythm as her cub's heartbeat on the monitor. "She's synchronizing with the heartbeat," Kira whispered in amazement. "She's telling us she understands, that she knows her baby is alive and safe." But the tender moment was shattered by the sound of Walsh's voice shouting orders outside. "Team Alpha, move to position. Team Beta, set up the containment net. This animal is showing advanced territorial behavior. Consider it extremely dangerous." The mother bear's head snapped toward the sound, and her peaceful demeanor vanished instantly. She let out a roar that shook the windows of the medical bay, a sound so powerful and filled with rage that everyone inside instinctively stepped back from the glass. "They don't understand," Marcus said, his face pale. "They think her intelligence makes her more dangerous, not less." The bear began to pace back and forth in front of the medical bay, never taking her eyes off the wildlife control officers who were now visible through the trees. Her movements were calculated, strategic, like a general preparing for battle. Dr. Lawson, Ryan said urgently. We need to get this surgery started now. If something happens to the mother, this cub is going to need to be strong enough to survive on its own. Kira nodded, forcing herself to focus on the medical emergency despite the crisis developing outside. But as she made the first incision in the cub's injured leg, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to witness something that would change everything they thought they knew about the intelligence and emotional capacity of wild animals. The mother bear's roar echoed through the forest again, and this time it was answered by another sound from deep in the woods, then another, and another. Those are other bears, Marcus said, his voice tight with concern. She's calling for help. The answering calls from the forest grew louder and more frequent, creating a symphony of deep, rumbling voices that seemed to come from every direction. Kira had never heard anything like it. It wasn't random bear vocalizations. There was a pattern, a rhythm, almost like a conversation happening in a language she couldn't understand. "How many do you think are out there?" Ryan asked, his hands trembling slightly as he assisted with the surgery on the cub's mangled leg. The infection was worse than Kira had initially thought, and she was working quickly to clean out the damaged tissue. "I count at least 5 distinct voices," Marcus replied, scanning the tree line with binoculars. "Maybe more. They're staying hidden, but they're definitely surrounding the area." Director Walsh's voice crackled over the radio, tension clear in his tone. "Dr. Lawson, we have a developing situation here. Our thermal imaging is showing multiple large animals in the forest around your facility. We need immediate evacuation of all personnel." "I'm in the middle of surgery," Kira replied firmly, not looking up from her work. "This cub will die if I stop now. The infection has reached the bone, and I need at least another hour to clean it out properly." Through the glass, they could see the mother bear had stopped pacing. She was sitting again, facing the medical bay, but her posture was different now. Her massive head was tilted slightly upward, and she was making a series of soft, low calls. Each call was answered immediately by voices from the forest, creating what could only be described as a coordinated communication network. "She's organizing them," Kira realized, pausing in her surgical work to watch the incredible display. "She's actually coordinating with the other bears." "That's impossible," Ryan protested. "Bears are solitary animals. They don't form cooperative groups like wolves or primates." But the evidence was right in front of them. The mother bear would make a specific sound, and it would be answered by a particular voice from the northeast. Then she would make a different sound, answered by a voice from the southwest. She was clearly directing the positioning of the other bears, using them to create a protective perimeter around the medical facility. "Dr. Lawson," Marcus said urgently. "Walsh's team is getting nervous. They're calling for backup, including helicopter support." Kira felt her stomach drop. Helicopter support meant they were planning to use aerial tranquilizer darts or worse. The situation was escalating beyond anything she could have imagined when she first heard the rescue helicopter that morning. The cub on the table stirred slightly, letting out a weak whimper as Kira worked to repair the damaged ligaments in its leg. Immediately, the mother bear's head snapped toward the sound, and she pressed her face against the glass again. Her breath fogged the window as she watched her baby, and she began that soft humming sound again. But this time, something extraordinary happened. The other bears in the forest began to hum along. The forest filled with a low, harmonious sound that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. It was hauntingly beautiful and completely unlike anything in recorded animal behavior. "They're all singing," Ryan whispered in amazement. "The entire group is singing to the cub." The vitals monitor showed an immediate response. The cub's heart rate stabilized at a perfect rhythm. Blood pressure improved, and even its brain activity patterns on the EEG became more regular. The collective voices of the bears were having a measurable therapeutic effect on the injured animal. "This is beyond anything in veterinary literature," Kira said, her voice filled with awe. "We're witnessing behavior that challenges everything we know about bear intelligence and social structure." The beautiful moment was interrupted by the roar of approaching engines. Through the windows facing the access road, they could see a convoy of vehicles arriving. Wildlife control trucks, state police cruisers, and bringing up the rear, a van from the State University's Wildlife Research Department. "Great," Marcus muttered. "Now, we're going to have scientists wanting to study this, while Walsh wants to eliminate it." The mother bear's humming stopped abruptly as she sensed the new arrivals. She stood and began pacing again, but her movements were more agitated now. The answering calls from the forest became more frequent and urgent, clearly responding to her increased stress. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stepped out of the university van, and Kira felt a surge of hope. Elena was one of the most respected animal behaviorists in the country, and more importantly, she had a reputation for protecting wildlife rather than exploiting it. "Marcus, get Dr. Rodriguez on the radio," Kira ordered. "She needs to understand what we're seeing here before Walsh does something irreversible." While Marcus worked to establish communication with Dr. Rodriguez, Kira continued the delicate surgery on the cub's leg. The bone was more damaged than she had hoped, but it was repairable. With proper care and physical therapy, the cub should be able to make a full recovery. "Dr. Lawson, this is Dr. Rodriguez." Elena's voice came through the radio clearly. "I'm seeing the thermal signatures of multiple bears in defensive positions around your facility. Can you describe their behavior?" "It's unprecedented," Kira replied, carefully placing a surgical pin in the cub's leg bone. "The mother bear appears to understand our medical equipment, responds to the vitals monitor, and is coordinating with other bears in what can only be described as organized group behavior. They've been singing, Dr. Rodriguez, harmonizing together to calm the injured cub." There was a long pause on the radio. "Singing? Are you certain about that description?" "I have 3 witnesses, and we could record it if they start again. This is completely unlike any documented bear behavior." "Dr. Lawson," Director Walsh's voice cut into the conversation, "whatever games you think these animals are playing, they represent a clear and present danger. We have authorization to use any means necessary to secure the area." "Director Walsh," Dr. Rodriguez's voice carried the authority of years of research and academic credibility. "I strongly advise against any aggressive action until we can properly assess this situation. If Dr. Lawson's observations are accurate, we may be witnessing a completely new form of animal intelligence. With respect, Dr. Rodriguez, I'm not here to conduct a nature documentary. I'm here to neutralize a threat." The mother bear seemed to sense the growing tension among the humans. She moved closer to the medical bay and placed both paws against the glass, standing upright to her full height. Her dark eyes moved from person to person inside the medical bay, and then she did something that made everyone freeze. She pointed. With one massive paw still pressed against the glass, she used the other to point directly at the vitals monitor. Then she pointed at the cub on the surgical table. Then she pointed at herself. The message was unmistakable. She understood the connection between the monitor, her cub, and her own presence. "Did everyone else see that?" Ryan asked, his voice barely a whisper. "She's demonstrating object recognition and symbolic thinking." Dr. Rodriguez's voice came over the radio, filled with excitement. "That's problem-solving behavior at a level we've never documented in bears." But their amazement was interrupted by a new sound from the forest. It wasn't the harmonious humming they had heard before. This was different, more urgent, almost like an alarm call. The mother bear immediately responded, dropping to all fours and turning toward the forest. "Something's wrong," Marcus said, scanning the tree line with his binoculars. "The other bears are agitated about something." Through the trees, they could see movement. But it wasn't bears. Human figures were moving through the forest, trying to stay hidden but visible to the trained eye. They were wearing camouflage and carrying equipment. Walsh brought in a tactical team, Kira realized with growing horror. "They're trying to surround the bears." The mother bear let out a roar that was different from any sound they had heard from her before. It was sharp, commanding, filled with urgency. Immediately, the forest erupted with answering roars and the sound of large bodies moving through the underbrush. "The bears are repositioning," Marcus reported. "They're spreading out, trying to avoid being surrounded." "Dr. Rodriguez," Kira called into the radio. "You need to stop this. These bears aren't acting aggressively. They're defending themselves and an injured family member." "I'm trying," Elena replied. "But Walsh has operational authority here. He's claiming the bears pose an imminent threat to human life." The tactical team was getting closer, and the mother bear was clearly aware of their approach. She looked back at the medical bay one more time, her eyes finding the vitals monitor that still showed her cub's steady heartbeat. Then she did something that broke everyone's heart. She pressed her nose against the glass and made a soft, whimpering sound. It was the sound of a mother saying goodbye to her child, not knowing if she would see them again. "She knows she might not survive this," Kira said, tears forming in her eyes. "She's saying goodbye." The mother bear turned away from the medical bay and walked toward the forest, but she didn't go far. She positioned herself in the open area between the building and the trees, making herself the most visible target. She was drawing the tactical team's attention away from the other bears, sacrificing her own safety to protect the group. "Dr. Rodriguez," Kira pleaded into the radio, "you have to document this behavior. This is intelligence and self-sacrifice at a level that will rewrite our understanding of animal consciousness." "I'm recording everything," Elena replied, "but I need you to keep that cub alive, Doctor." Lawson. "If something happens to the mother, that recording may be the only proof we have of what we witnessed here." Kira looked down at the small bear on her surgical table. The operation was nearly complete, but the cub was still hours away from being stable enough to survive without intensive care. She had to finish the surgery, but every instinct in her body was screaming that she needed to do something to protect the mother bear, who had shown such incredible intelligence and love. The sound of helicopter rotors began to echo through the valley, growing louder by the minute. Walsh's backup was arriving, and with it, the probability that this extraordinary encounter between humans and bears would end in tragedy. "The helicopters coming in from the north," Marcus reported grimly. "And there are more vehicles on the access road." The mother bear stood perfectly still in the clearing, no longer trying to hide or flee. She was facing the approaching tactical team with quiet dignity, ready to make whatever sacrifice was necessary to protect her family and her kind. In the medical bay, the vitals monitor continued its steady beeping, marking the heartbeat of a small bear, who might soon become an orphan, while outside, the most intelligent wild animal any of them had ever encountered prepared to face overwhelming odds to ensure her baby's survival. "Dr. Rodriguez," Kira said into the radio, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "Whatever happens next, make sure the world knows what we saw here. Make sure they know these bears are not just animals. They're individuals with intelligence, emotions, and the capacity for love that rivals our own." The helicopter appeared over the tree line, its searchlight cutting through the morning shadows as it prepared to land. The final confrontation between human authority and animal intelligence was about to begin. The helicopter's downdraft sent leaves and debris swirling through the clearing as it touched down 50 yards from where the mother bear stood her ground. She didn't flinch or retreat, even as the powerful rotor wash flattened the grass around her massive frame. Her dark eyes remained fixed on the aircraft, watching as armed personnel emerged from its cabin. 6 tactical officers, full tranquilizer gear, Marcus reported, his voice tense as he watched through binoculars. They're setting up a perimeter formation. Kira's hands never stopped moving as she worked to complete the cub's surgery, but her heart was racing. The delicate work of repairing torn ligaments required absolute precision, but the drama unfolding outside made it almost impossible to concentrate. Heart rate is still stable, Ryan reported, monitoring the cub's vitals. Whatever that mother bear is feeling right now, she's keeping it controlled enough that it's not affecting her baby. That observation struck Kira as profoundly significant. Even in the face of mortal danger, the mother bear was maintaining the calm, rhythmic breathing and emotional state that was somehow helping to keep her cub stable. It was a level of emotional self-control that would be remarkable in a human, let alone a wild animal. Dr. Rodriguez's voice crackled urgently over the radio. "Dr. Lawson, I need you to document everything you're observing about the physiological connection between the mother and cub. The cub's vital signs are remaining stable despite being under general anesthesia, which shouldn't be possible unless there's some external calming influence." "It's like they're connected somehow," Kira replied, carefully suturing the repaired muscle tissue. "Every time the mother changes her breathing pattern or emotional state, the cub's vitals respond immediately. I've never seen anything like it in 30 years of veterinary medicine." Outside, Director Walsh had arrived at the tactical command post that was rapidly being established near the helicopter. Through the medical bay's windows, they could see him gesturing animatedly as he briefed the tactical team. Even at a distance, his body language conveyed urgency and determination. The mother bear suddenly turned her massive head toward the forest and made a series of short, sharp calls. The response was immediate and coordinated. 5 distinct bear voices answered from different positions around the perimeter, each call slightly different in tone and duration. "She's doing a roll call," Marcus realized, his voice filled with amazement. "She's checking on each of the other bears to make sure they're still in position. And they're all answering," Ryan added. "Each bear is confirming their location with a unique vocal signature." Dr. Rodriguez's excited voice came over the radio. "Are you recording this? This is military-level tactical communication. Bears don't exhibit this kind of organized group behavior in any documented research." But before anyone could respond, something unexpected happened that changed everything. From deep in the forest came a new sound, unlike any of the bear vocalizations they had heard before. It was higher-pitched, more urgent, and definitely not coming from an adult bear. The mother bear's entire demeanor changed instantly. Her ears snapped forward, her head tilted, and she let out a questioning call toward the forest. The response came immediately, and everyone in the medical bay felt their blood run cold. It was another cub. There was a second cub somewhere in the forest. "Oh my God," Kira breathed, her surgical instruments trembling in her hands. "She has another baby out there." The implications hit them all at once. The mother bear wasn't just protecting an injured cub and a group of adult bears. She had a second cub hidden in the forest, and the tactical team's operation was putting that baby at risk too. The mother bear began pacing frantically now, torn between staying near her injured cub in the medical bay and protecting her other baby in the forest. Her distress calls became more frequent and urgent. clearly trying to communicate with the hidden cub while keeping track of the approaching tactical team. "Dr. Rodriguez," Kira called into the radio. "You need to tell Walsh that there's a second cub in the forest. If his team moves in aggressively, they could accidentally harm another baby." "I'm trying to reach him," Elena replied, "but he switched to tactical communications. He's not responding to civilian radio calls anymore." Through the window, they could see the tactical team beginning to move. 6 officers were advancing in a coordinated formation, tranquilizer rifles raised, while the helicopter crew prepared dart guns from their elevated position. The mother bear was going to be caught in crossfire from multiple directions. But then, something extraordinary happened that no one could have predicted. The forest erupted with the sound of multiple bear cubs calling out. Not just one additional cub, but several. Young voices joined the adult bears in a chorus of vocalizations that revealed the true scope of what was happening. "It's a family group," Marcus said, his voice filled with awe and horror. "Multiple females with cubs. The mother bear isn't just protecting her own babies, she's protecting an entire extended family." The mother bear's response to hearing all the cubs was immediate and heartbreaking. She let out a long, mournful wail that seemed to carry all the anguish of a mother who couldn't protect all her children at once. Then she made a decision that demonstrated intelligence and self-sacrifice beyond anything they could have imagined. She began to move away from the medical bay, drawing the tactical team's attention away from both the building and the forest where the cubs were hidden. She was making herself the primary target, hoping to lead the armed humans away from all the young bears, including her own injured baby. "She's creating a diversion," Kira realized, tears streaming down her face as she continued to work on the cub's surgery. "She's sacrificing herself to protect all the cubs." The tactical team took the bait, following the mother bear as she moved toward the far end of the clearing. But Dr. Rodriguez had finally managed to get through to someone with authority, because suddenly Walsh's voice boomed over a loudspeaker. "All teams, hold position. Do not engage until we have confirmation of target count and location of additional animals." The mother bear stopped moving and turned back toward the medical bay. For a moment, there was complete silence except for the steady beeping of the vitals monitor and the distant hum of the helicopter engines. Then she did something that made everyone question everything they thought they knew about animal consciousness. She walked back to the glass wall of the medical bay and began to trace patterns in the condensation her breath had left on the window. Not random marks, but deliberate shapes. Circles, lines, and what looked almost like symbols. Is she trying to write something?" Ryan asked, his voice barely a whisper. "She's drawing," Marcus confirmed, watching through binoculars. "Deliberate, purposeful marks. That's not instinctive behavior, that's creative expression." The pattern she traced seemed to follow a logic that none of them could decipher, but the intent was clear. She was trying to communicate something specific, something that was important enough to risk exposure to the tactical team. Dr. Rodriguez's voice came over the radio, filled with scientific excitement despite the dangerous situation. "Dr. Lawson, I need detailed descriptions of those markings. If a bear is creating symbolic representations, we're witnessing the birth of a new form of animal communication." But before Kira could respond, the forest erupted again with bear vocalizations. This time, however, the sounds were different. They weren't the coordinated calls of adults or the distress cries of cubs. These were warning calls, sharp and urgent, coming from multiple directions at once. "Something else is in the forest," Marcus said, scanning the tree line with growing alarm. "The bears are warning about something new." Through the trees, they could see movement that was definitely not bears or tactical officers. Human figures were moving through the underbrush, but they weren't wearing the camouflage gear of Walsh's team. These people were dressed in dark civilian clothes and moving with practiced stealth. "Who the hell is that?" Ryan demanded. The answer came from an unexpected source. The mother bear let out a roar that was different from any sound she had made before. It was pure rage, primal and terrifying. She recognized whoever was moving through the forest, and her reaction suggested they represented a threat far greater than the wildlife control officers. "Get on the radio to Walsh," Kira ordered Marcus. "Tell him there are unauthorized personnel in the forest." This could be the poacher who set the snare coming back to cover his tracks. But even as Marcus worked to establish communication, the situation in the forest was deteriorating rapidly. The bears' warning calls became more frantic, and they could hear the sound of large bodies crashing through the underbrush as the animals tried to protect their cubs from this new threat. The mother bear was faced with an impossible choice. She could stay near her injured cub, try to protect the other cubs in the forest, or confront the mysterious figures who had triggered such a violent reaction from all the bears. Her anguish was visible as she paced frantically, torn between multiple life or death decisions. "Doctor." "Lawson." Dr. Rodriguez's voice came over the radio with urgent authority. "I need you to finish that surgery as quickly as possible. Whatever is happening in that forest, we may need to evacuate all personnel within the next few minutes." Kira looked down at the small bear on her surgical table. The operation was nearly complete, but the cub still needed at least 20 more minutes of careful work to ensure the bone pins were properly placed. If she rushed the procedure, the cub might survive, but could be permanently disabled. If she took the time to do it right, they might all be caught in whatever conflict was developing in the forest. Through the glass, the mother bear had stopped pacing and was staring directly at Kira. Their eyes met across the barrier of glass and species, and in that moment, Kira felt a connection that transcended language or logic. The bear was asking her to save her baby, trusting her to complete the work while she dealt with the threats outside. "I won't abandon your cub," Kira whispered, even though she knew the bear couldn't hear her. "I promise." The mother bear nodded once, as if she had somehow understood, then turned and ran toward the forest where gunshots had just erupted. The poachers, whoever they were, had opened fire on something, and the bear's protective calls had turned into roars of pain and rage. The peaceful morning at the Alpine Wildlife Medical Center had become a war zone, with an injured bear cub as the innocent victim caught in the middle of forces beyond anyone's control. And somewhere in the chaos, the most intelligent wild animal any of them had ever encountered was fighting to protect her family against odds that seemed insurmountable. The vitals monitor continued its steady beeping, marking the heartbeat of a small bear whose survival had become the center of a conflict that would determine not just the fate of one family of bears, but potentially the future of human-wildlife relations in the entire region. The gunshots echoed through the valley like thunder, followed immediately by a sound that chilled everyone in the medical bay to the bone. It was a bear's scream of pain, high-pitched and desperate, unlike anything in nature's normal vocabulary. The mother bear's roar of rage answered immediately, so loud and fierce that the windows of the medical bay vibrated. "That wasn't a warning shot," Marcus said grimly, his face pale as he monitored the forest through his binoculars. "Someone just shot one of the bears." Kira's hands trembled as she worked to secure the final bone pin in the cub's leg. The surgery was almost complete, but the sounds from the forest made it nearly impossible to concentrate. Every instinct in her body was screaming to help the wounded animal, but abandoning the cub now would mean certain death for the small bear on her table. "Dr. Rodriguez, we have shots fired in the forest," Marcus radioed urgently. "At least one bear is wounded. We need immediate medical assistance and law enforcement backup. I'm trying to coordinate with Walsh, but his tactical team is refusing to enter the forest until they know who's shooting. Elena's voice came back, frustration clear in her tone. The poachers may be heavily armed. Through the glass wall, they could see the tactical officers taking defensive positions behind their vehicles. The helicopter had lifted off again, circling the area but staying well above rifle range. Director Walsh was shouting orders into his radio, but it was clear that his carefully planned operation had been completely disrupted by the unexpected arrival of armed poachers. Another gunshot rang out, followed by the crash of a large body falling through tree branches. The bears' vocalizations became frantic, no longer the organized communication they had witnessed earlier. These were cries of fear, pain, and desperate attempts to locate family members in the chaos. "The mother bear hasn't come back," Ryan observed, checking the timestamps on the cub's surgical monitor. "She's been gone for 8 minutes. That's not like her." Kira felt her heart sink. Throughout the entire morning, the mother bear had never been away from the medical bay for more than a few minutes. Her absence now could only mean one thing. She was either pursuing the poachers or she had been wounded herself. As if responding to their fears, the vitals monitor suddenly began showing irregular readings. The cub's heart rate spiked, then dropped, then spiked again. Its breathing became labored, and the EEG pattern showed signs of distress even under general anesthesia. The cub knows something's wrong with its mother, Kira realized, quickly adjusting the anesthesia levels to try to stabilize the small bear. Whatever connection they have, it's strong enough to affect the cub even when unconscious. "That's medically impossible," Ryan protested, but the evidence was right there on the monitors. The cub's vital signs were deteriorating rapidly, not because of surgical complications, but because of some inexplicable bond with its mother. Dr. Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio with urgent authority. "Dr. Lawson, you need to understand what you're dealing with. If that cub is physiologically connected to its mother, and the mother has been injured or killed, the cub may not survive regardless of the success of your surgery." The implications of that statement hit Kira like a physical blow. She had seen cases where animals grieved for lost companions, but never anything like active physiological dependence between family members. If the mother bear was dead, the cub might literally die of heartbreak. "I'm not giving up," Kira said firmly, working frantically to complete the final surgical procedures. "We're going to save this cub, and we're going to hope that its mother is still alive out there." But even as she spoke, more gunshots erupted from the forest, rapid fire this time, suggesting an extended firefight. The bear's roars had become screams of rage and pain, and the sound of large bodies crashing through the underbrush indicated a running battle between the animals and the poachers. Suddenly, Marcus shouted from his position at the window. "Something's coming out of the forest. It's huge." They all looked up to see a massive brown shape emerging from the tree line. It was a male bear, larger even than the mother bear had been, and he was moving with purpose toward the medical center. But there was something terribly wrong with his gait. Dark stains marked his fur, and he was limping heavily on his left front leg. "He's been shot," Ryan said, his voice filled with horror, "and he's heading straight for us." The wounded male bear approached the medical bay with surprising gentleness, despite his obvious pain. When he reached the glass wall, he did something that made everyone freeze. He pressed his massive paw against the window in exactly the same spot where the mother bear had placed hers, and he looked directly at the vitals monitor. "He knows," Kira whispered. "He knows about the cub, and he knows what that monitor means." The male bear began to make the same soft humming sound they had heard from the mother bear, but it was deeper, more resonant. The effect on the cub was immediate. Its vital signs began to stabilize, the heart rate settling into a more normal rhythm. He's taking over for the mother, Marcus realized. He's providing the same calming influence she was. But their moment of hope was shattered by the arrival of a new threat. A man in dark camouflage clothing burst out of the forest, carrying a high-powered rifle. He was bleeding from scratches on his face and arms, clearly having been mauled by one of the bears, and his eyes held the wild look of someone who had been pushed beyond rational thought. "That's him," Marcus said grimly. "That's got to be the poacher who set the snares." The man saw the wounded male bear standing peacefully by the medical bay and raised his rifle without hesitation. The bear was an easy target, focused entirely on comforting the cub and making no attempt to defend himself. "He's going to shoot!" Ryan shouted. Without thinking, Kira dropped her surgical instruments and ran to the window, pounding on the glass to get the bear's attention. "Move, get away from here." The male bear looked at her with those same intelligent dark eyes they had seen in the mother bear. He understood the danger, but he didn't move. Instead, he increased the volume of his humming, as if he was determined to keep the cub stable regardless of the cost to himself. The poacher's rifle cracked, and the bullet struck the glass wall of the medical bay. The reinforced window held, but spiderweb cracks spread across its surface. The poacher was aiming not just at the bear, but at the medical facility itself. "He's trying to kill the cub, too," Marcus said, his voice tight with disbelief. "He wants to eliminate all the evidence of what he's done." Director Walsh's voice suddenly boomed over the tactical loudspeaker. "Drop your weapon. You are surrounded by law enforcement officers." The poacher spun around to see the tactical team emerging from their defensive positions, tranquilizer rifles replaced with real weapons. But instead of surrendering, he raised his rifle toward the approaching officers. The wounded male bear made a decision that demonstrated both intelligence and heroism. He charged the poacher, using his massive body to shield the medical bay while giving the tactical team a clear shot. The poacher fired wildly, but his shots went wide as 600 pounds of determined bear knocked him to the ground. The tactical team moved in immediately, but the damage was done. The male bear had taken another bullet, this one in his chest, and he was losing blood rapidly. As the officers secured the poacher, the bear crawled back to the window of the medical bay and resumed his position, still humming to the cub despite his mortal wounds. "We have to help him," Kira said, tears streaming down her face as she watched the noble animal slowly dying while still trying to comfort the cub. "Dr. Lawson," Dr. Rodriguez's voice came over the radio. "I'm coordinating with Walsh to establish a field medical station. We may be able to treat the wounded bear, but you need to finish with the cub first." Kira looked down at the small bear on her surgical table. The operation was finally complete, the bone pin secured, the muscle tissue repaired, and the wound properly cleaned. But the cub was still unconscious and would need hours of careful monitoring before it could be considered stable. Through the cracked glass, the male bear continued his vigil, his humming growing weaker as his strength faded. The cub's vitals remained steady, held in that mysterious balance by the adult bear's presence and dedication. "There's more movement in the forest," Marcus reported, scanning the tree line. "I think the other bears are coming out." One by one, adult bears began emerging from the woods. Some were wounded, others appeared unharmed, but all of them moved with the same purpose toward the medical center. They weren't approaching aggressively. They were coming to pay their respects to the male bear who was dying to protect one of their young. "It's a vigil," Ryan whispered. "They're holding a vigil for him." 7 adult bears arranged themselves in a semicircle around the wounded male, and as he continued his weakening hum, they joined their voices to his. The sound that filled the mountain valley was unlike anything in recorded animal behavior, a funeral song being sung for a hero who had sacrificed himself to protect a child. But the most heartbreaking moment came when a small shape appeared at the edge of the group. It was another cub, smaller than the one on the surgical table, moving carefully on 3 legs. One of its paws was bandaged with what looked like torn fabric, suggesting that someone had tried to provide first aid. That's the other cub, Kira realized, the mother bear's other baby. The injured cub approached the glass wall and pressed its tiny paw against the window, right next to where the dying male bear's massive paw rested. The symbolism was overwhelming. 3 generations of bears, connected by love and loss, united in their vigil for the smallest member of their family. Dr. Rodriguez's voice came over the radio, filled with emotion. "Dr. Lawson, are you recording this? We're witnessing behavior that proves these animals have emotional intelligence, social structures, and moral concepts that rival human civilization." But Kira was too overwhelmed to respond. The sight of the bear's vigil, the sound of their funeral song, and the knowledge that the mother bear was still missing somewhere in the forest had pushed her beyond words. All she could do was continue monitoring the unconscious cub's vital signs while watching the most profound display of animal emotion and intelligence ever documented. The male bear's humming finally faded to silence as his strength left him. His massive head came to rest against the cracked glass, his eyes still fixed on the vitals monitor that showed the steady heartbeat of the cub he had died protecting. The other bear's song continued, a harmony of grief and love that echoed through the mountains as the sun climbed higher in the sky. And in the medical bay, a small bear cub began to stir, its surgery complete, unaware that it owed its life to the sacrifice of the noblest animal any of them had ever known. The cub's eyelids fluttered open for the first time since the surgery began, revealing dark brown eyes that held the same depth of intelligence they had seen in the adult bears. Kira felt her breath catch as the small animal tried to lift its head, still groggy from the anesthesia, but clearly fighting to become conscious. "Easy, little one," Kira whispered, gently restraining the cub as it attempted to move its bandaged leg. "You're safe now. Your surgery went perfectly." But the cub wasn't responding to her voice. Its attention was focused entirely on the cracked glass wall where the male bear's lifeless form still rested. The small animal began to make soft whimpering sounds, clearly sensing that something was terribly wrong despite its weakened state. "It knows," Ryan observed, monitoring the cub's vital signs as they fluctuated with its emotional distress. "Even coming out of anesthesia, it can sense what happened." Outside, the circle of adult bears continued their vigil, but their song had changed. What had been a mournful harmony was now punctuated by sharper calls, more urgent vocalizations that suggested they were communicating about something new. "Dr. Lawson," Marcus called from the observation window, his voice tight with concern. "We have movement in the forest again. Something big is coming through the trees." Kira looked up from the cub to see what had captured Marcus's attention. Through the gaps in the trees, they could see a massive brown shape moving slowly but deliberately toward the clearing. This bear was larger than any they had seen yet, and there was something different about its movement pattern. "That's an old bear," Dr. Rodriguez's voice came over the radio. "Look at the gray around its muzzle and the careful way it's walking. That's an elderly matriarch, probably the grandmother of this family group." The ancient bear emerged from the forest with a dignity that silenced even the tactical officers who were still securing the crime scene. She was enormous, easily 500 pounds, with silver-touched fur and scars that spoke of decades of survival in the wilderness. But what struck everyone most was her bearing. She moved like royalty, with a presence that commanded respect from every creature in the clearing. The circle of adult bears immediately parted to allow the matriarch access to the fallen male. She approached his body slowly, pressing her massive snout against his still form in what could only be described as a final blessing. Then she raised her head and let out a call that was unlike anything they had heard from the other bears. It was ancient, primal, carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate from the very bones of the earth. The sound echoed off the mountain walls and seemed to call to something deep in the collective memory of every living thing in the valley. "She's calling the mother," Kira realized suddenly. "That's a summoning call for the missing bear." The response came immediately from deep in the forest. A weak, pained call answered the matriarch's summons, growing louder as its source moved through the trees toward the clearing. The mother bear was alive, but she was clearly injured. "There!" Marcus pointed toward a thick stand of pine trees. "I can see her. She's limping badly, and there's blood on her fur." The mother bear emerged from the forest, and the sight of her broke everyone's heart. She had taken at least 2 bullets, one in her shoulder and another in her side. Dark blood matted her fur, and she was barely able to walk. But her eyes were fixed on the medical bay where her cub was recovering, and nothing was going to stop her from reaching her baby. The matriarch moved to support the injured mother, allowing the younger bear to lean against her massive frame as they approached the medical center together. The other bears closed ranks around them, creating a protective escort that radiated both grief and determination. "We have to help her," Kira said, watching the mother bear struggle with each step. "She's lost too much blood. She won't survive without immediate medical attention." "Dr. Lawson," Director Walsh's voice came over the tactical radio. "I understand your concern, but we cannot allow an injured wild animal into a medical facility. The risk to human personnel is too great. That bear has shown more intelligence and emotional capacity than most humans I know," Kira shot back, her anger overriding her usual diplomatic approach with authority figures. "She's not a wild animal anymore. She's a patient who needs our help." Dr. Rodriguez's voice cut through the argument with scientific authority. "Director Walsh, based on the behavior we've documented here today, this bear family demonstrates cognitive abilities that require us to reconsider our entire approach to wildlife management. Denying medical care to an injured intelligent being raises serious ethical questions." While the debate raged over the radio, the mother bear had reached the glass wall where her cub lay recovering. Despite her wounds and obvious pain, she pressed her paw against the window in the exact spot where the male bear's paw had rested. The cub responded immediately, turning its head toward its mother and making soft mewing sounds of recognition. "The connection is still there," Ryan observed, watching the monitors as the cub's vital signs strengthened at its mother's presence. Even separated by glass and walls, they're still affecting each other's physiology. But the touching reunion was interrupted by an unexpected development that changed everything. A convoy of vehicles was approaching on the access road, but these weren't wildlife control or law enforcement vehicles. The lead car bore the distinctive markings of the state governor's office. "What is the governor's office doing here?" Marcus wondered aloud. The answer came from Dr. Rodriguez, who had clearly been expecting this development. "I may have made some phone calls," she admitted over the radio. "When I realized the significance of what we were witnessing, I contacted some people who needed to know about this immediately." The convoy stopped in the clearing, and several people in suits emerged from the vehicles, including a woman Kira recognized from news broadcasts as the state's attorney general. They were followed by a team of what appeared to be federal wildlife officials, and, most surprisingly, a group of people carrying camera equipment. Dr. Rodriguez, the woman who appeared to be leading the group, called out as she approached the tactical command post. "I'm Attorney General Sarah Mitchell. We understand you have a situation here that requires immediate high-level attention." Director Walsh looked confused and more than a little angry at having his operation suddenly invaded by state officials. "Attorney General Mitchell, this is an active wildlife control situation. We have dangerous animals and armed poachers. This area should be secured." "Director Walsh," the Attorney General replied firmly, "based on the preliminary reports Dr. Rodriguez has provided, we may be dealing with animals that possess cognitive abilities advanced enough to warrant legal protection under the Endangered Species Act's intelligence provisions. That makes this a federal matter." The implications of her statement hit everyone at once. If the bears were officially recognized as possessing advanced intelligence, they would be entitled to legal protections that would completely change how they could be treated. But the most dramatic development was yet to come. As the government officials and media crews set up their equipment, the ancient matriarch bear did something that stunned everyone present. She approached the group of humans and, maintaining a respectful distance, sat down and began to vocalize in what could only be described as a structured presentation. "She's trying to communicate with the officials," Dr. Rodriguez said, her voice filled with excitement. "Look at her body language. She's not being submissive or aggressive. She's presenting information." The matriarch made a series of calls toward the forest, and in response, other bears began to emerge. Not just the family group they had seen earlier, but a larger community. Bears of all ages came out of the woods and arranged themselves in what appeared to be a formal gathering. "There are at least 15 bears out there," Marcus counted through his binoculars. 3 family groups, including cubs and juveniles. This isn't just one family, it's an entire community. The matriarch then did something that made the camera crews scramble to get better footage. She approached the medical bay where the injured mother was still maintaining her vigil over the cub. With gentle precision, she began to trace patterns in the dirt with her massive claws. The patterns were not random. They were clearly representational, showing the layout of the forest, the location of the medical center, and what appeared to be symbols representing the bears and humans. "She's making a map," the Attorney General said, her voice filled with amazement. "That bear is creating a visual representation of the situation." Dr. Rodriguez was practically vibrating with excitement. "This is unprecedented. We're witnessing the emergence of symbolic communication in a wild animal population. This could be the most significant discovery in animal cognition research in human history." But the most remarkable moment was still to come. The cub, inside the medical bay, still weak from surgery but increasingly alert, began to vocalize in response to the activity outside. Its calls were answered immediately by the mother bear and then by the entire community. What followed was clearly a conversation. The cub would make a sound, the mother would respond, the matriarch would add her voice, and other bears would contribute specific vocalizations. It was a family conference, discussing the situation and making decisions about their future. They're voting, Kira realized, watching the patterns of communication. The community is making collective decisions about how to respond to this situation. The conversation continued for several minutes, with different bears contributing their voices in what appeared to be a structured debate. Finally, the matriarch made a series of commanding calls that seemed to settle the matter. Then she turned toward the group of government officials and approached them directly. Stopping 10 feet away, she sat down again and made a single, clear vocalization that sounded remarkably like a word. "Help." The syllable was unmistakable, clearly enunciated in a way that suggested deliberate mimicry of human speech. The bear had just asked for help in English. The clearing fell into complete silence, except for the steady beeping of the medical monitors inside the bay. Every human present understood that they had just witnessed something that would change the relationship between humans and wildlife forever. "Get the governor on the phone," the Attorney General said quietly to one of her aides. "We're going to need emergency legislation, and we're going to need it today." Inside the medical bay, the cub was struggling to stand, clearly wanting to reunite with its mother despite its injuries. The mother bear outside was pressing her entire body against the glass, trying to reach her baby while her own wounds slowly weakened her. "Dr. Lawson," Dr. Rodriguez called over the radio. "I think it's time we considered opening that door. These bears have just demonstrated that they pose no threat to human life. In fact, they may be asking us to become partners in their care." Kira looked at the cracked glass wall, the dying mother bear on one side and her recovering cub on the other. The choice was clear, but the implications were staggering. Opening that door would mean treating the bears as equals, as intelligent beings worthy of the same medical care they would provide to any human patient. But as she watched the mother bear's eyes, still filled with hope despite her pain, Kira knew there was really no choice at all. "Marcus," she said firmly, "open the door." The electronic lock disengaged with a soft click that seemed to echo through the entire valley. As the reinforced door slowly swung open, the wounded mother bear took a tentative step forward, her dark eyes never leaving her cub who was struggling to sit up on the surgical table. "Easy, Mama," Kira whispered, her voice gentle but confident. "Come, meet your baby." The mother bear moved with incredible care, each step deliberate and respectful. Despite her pain and blood loss, she seemed to understand the sanctity of the medical space she was entering. The ancient matriarch followed close behind, her massive presence filling the doorway like a living monument to wilderness wisdom. As the mother bear approached the surgical table, the cub let out a weak but joyful cry of recognition. The reunion was electric. The mother pressed her snout gently against her baby's face, and the cub nuzzled into her familiar warmth. The vitals monitor immediately showed the cub's heart rate stabilizing at the strongest rhythm they had recorded all day. "The physiological connection is complete now," Ryan observed, tears streaming down his face as he watched the tender moment. "Look at those readings. The cub's healing is actually accelerating with its mother present." But Kira's attention was focused on the mother bear's wounds. Up close, she could see the extent of the damage. The bullets had missed vital organs, but infection was setting in, and the bear was dangerously weak from blood loss. "We need to get you on a table, too," Kira said softly to the mother bear, gesturing toward the second surgical station they had quickly prepared. What happened next left everyone speechless. The mother bear looked at Kira, then at the surgical table, then back at her cub. After a moment of consideration, she carefully moved to the second table and, with obvious effort, climbed onto it. She was trusting humans with her life, just as she had trusted them with her babies. "She understands, Doctor." Rodriguez's voice came over the radio, filled with wonder. "She knows we want to help her, and she's consenting to treatment." As Kira began to examine the mother bear's wounds, the ancient matriarch took up a position beside the cub's table. The old bear began the soft humming they had heard before, but now both patients were responding. The mother bear's breathing became more relaxed, and the cub settled into a peaceful sleep, still touching its mother with one small paw. "Dr. Lawson," the Attorney General called from the doorway, "what you're doing here is being broadcast live across the nation. The whole world is watching the first medical treatment of officially recognized intelligent wildlife." Working on the mother bear was like operating on a patient who was actively participating in her own care. When Kira needed to clean a particularly deep wound, the bear would position herself to provide better access. When the pain became intense, she would look directly at Kira with eyes that clearly communicated trust and understanding. "This is remarkable," Marcus said, assisting with the surgical instruments. She's not just tolerating the treatment, she's helping with it. As Kira worked to remove the bullets and clean the infected wounds, the other bears outside began a new kind of vocalization. It wasn't the mournful song they had sung for the fallen male bear. This was different, warmer, filled with hope and gratitude. They're singing a healing song, Dr. Rodriguez explained over the radio. Traditional human cultures have healing ceremonies. We may be witnessing the bear's equivalent. The surgery took 2 hours, but the mother bear never moved unnecessarily or showed any sign of aggression, even during the most painful procedures. When Kira finally completed the last suture, the bear gently touched her arm with one massive paw, a gesture of thanks that needed no translation. Both patients are stable, Kira announced, exhaustion and elation mixing in her voice. The cub should make a full recovery, and the mother bear's wounds are clean and properly repaired. Outside, the news that both bears would survive was met with a celebration unlike anything ever recorded in animal behavior research. The entire community of bears began a joyous chorus that filled the mountain valley with harmonious voices, each bear contributing to a symphony of relief and happiness. The Attorney General stepped into the medical bay, her expression one of profound respect. "Dr. Lawson, what you've accomplished here today goes far beyond veterinary medicine. You've helped facilitate the first successful diplomatic contact between humanity and another intelligent species." As the sun began to set over the mountains, casting golden light through the medical bay windows, both bear patients rested peacefully. The cub slept curled against its mother's side, while the mother bear kept one eye open, maintaining her eternal vigil over her baby. The ancient matriarch approached Kira directly, moving with slow dignity. She stopped just arm's length away and made a sound that was unmistakably a word. "Thank you." The pronunciation was careful, deliberate, clearly the result of having listened to human speech and learned to reproduce it. The old bear was thanking Kira not just for saving 2 lives, but for opening the door to a new relationship between their species. "You're welcome," Kira replied, looking directly into the bear's ancient wise eyes. "Welcome to the beginning of something beautiful." As night fell over the Alpine Wildlife Medical Center, the bears maintained their vigil outside while the human medical team monitored their patients inside. The world had changed forever that day. The line between human and animal intelligence had been crossed, not through conquest or domination, but through compassion, understanding, and mutual respect. Dr. Rodriguez's final radio transmission of the day captured the magnitude of what they had witnessed. Today, we didn't just save 2 bears. We discovered that we're not alone in possessing consciousness, emotion, and the capacity for love. We found our partners in caring for this planet. Inside the medical bay, the mother bear hummed softly to her sleeping cub, the same lullaby that had calmed the small bear throughout the longest day of both their lives. The vitals monitor beeped steadily, marking not just the heartbeat of a healed patient, but the rhythm of a new world where intelligence was recognized and respected wherever it was found. The story that had begun with the simple rescue call had become the first chapter in humanity's relationship with the other intelligent species that shared their world. And it had all started with a mother's love for her child, proving that the most powerful force in nature transcends all boundaries between species. In the soft glow of the medical monitors, 2 bears slept peacefully while outside their window. An entire community kept watch, ready to protect and cherish the family that had bridged 2 worlds with courage, trust, and an unbreakable bond of love. The vitals monitor continued its gentle beeping, marking time in a world that would never be the same again.